Good evening. My name is Vicki Sessoms, and I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Delaware. This is the first of a four-part series designed to raise awareness of the struggle for affordable housing. We express our thanks to Rabbi Sonia Starr of Housing Alliance of Delaware, Melody Taylor of HUD, and PACE for organizing this program. We also want to recognize our sponsors, the Housing Alliance of Delaware, HUD, Southern Delaware Alliance for Racial Justice, and the Newcastle Presbytery. We have many attendees, so please keep yourselves muted at this time. We've had 125 registered, which is just wonderful for this program. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat to Sonia Starr, and they will be addressed at the end of the session. If you have an interest in working on housing with the League, please email Linda Barnett through the chat. And also, I'm reminding everyone that as a member, the League's convention will be in May. I will now turn the meeting over to Rabbi Sonia Starr.
Thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you so much for everybody who has worked so hard to make this four-part series happen. The housing crisis in Delaware is serious, and the fact that we have to meet to talk about just shows how concerned people are about this crisis. It also shows that there's opportunity for us to transform the community and really work our way out of it if we all work together. So this panel is just the beginning of a four-part series to really engage with what this housing crisis is and how we can work together to solve it. My name is Sonia Starr. I'm the Policy Director at Housing Alliance Delaware, and I have the privilege of emceeing tonight's program. We have three amazing speakers. I'm going to introduce each one before they speak. They're all each going to speak for 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for a full discussion. So please, put your questions in the chat, and we will have an opportunity to really enter into a conversation about what this means to us here in Delaware. So we're going to jump in and begin with Director Eugene Young. He was appointed to his current position as the Director of Delaware State Housing Authority by Governor John Carney in May of 2021. He drives Delaware State Housing Authority is often called DSHA. We're going to try to minimize the acronyms, but DSHA's mission is to provide and assist others to provide quality, affordable housing opportunities and appropriate supportive services to low and moderate income Delawareans. Before his appointment, Director Young served as the president and CEO of the Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League and co-founded Network Delaware, a grassroots member-led organization of community members, leaders, organizers, and activists joining together to bring real sustainable change to Delaware. He began his career 16 years ago by co-founding Delaware Elite, a youth leadership development program that provided inner city youth with academic enrichment, leadership training, and college access. He was born and raised on the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. He graduated from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County with a dual major in information systems and sociology, and received a master's in public administration from Wilmington University and studied nonprofit management at the University of Delaware. Director Young lives by the words of Cornel West: "You cannot lead the people if you don't love the people, and you cannot save the people if you do not serve the people." It is a great honor to learn from and with you, Director Young. So I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Rabbi Sonia Starr. So I want to, first, I just, I believe in this aspect of you start how you plan to finish. And with that said, I want to start by saying thank you. I have a ton of love for the League of Women Voters going back years. I mean, 2015, I had the pleasure of being at your annual conference in Dover. been able to work throughout the years on legislation, advocate on legislation. I still remember to this day seeing Sandy in the halls of Legislative Hall, running around pushing for different bills and saying we're going to get them. I mean, I absolutely love you've worked with us on debate forums to make sure information gets out to community. I personally cannot thank the League of Women Voters enough for the work that you all do. So sincerely, I want to thank you, leadership and everyone involved. Thank you so much for the work you do. I also want to thank HAD, Housing Alliance of Delaware, and also Dr. Metro from University of Delaware. It is amazing when you have partners that are pushing you, all of us pushing each other lovingly in a direction towards getting to quality housing, more quality housing in our state. And I think that's, it's just so critical for the time that we're in right now. So I will be very brief. I'll be under 10 minutes. I know people think like, really under 10 minutes? I will be under 10 minutes. I am going to make it short and sweet and talking about some of, I've been asked to talk about some of the issues that we have in housing. And then I believe we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the solutions. So I'm going to just paint kind of the picture of where we are right now, if that's okay with everyone. I see some head nods. All right, sounds good. Delaware right now, we are, we're in as many other states, we're not the only one, but we're in a tough space when it comes to the housing front. If you were to go to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, again, this National Low Income Housing Coalition, you just Google that in Delaware. It will come up and show that we are behind around 18,000 affordable housing units in our state. That 18,000 for a population of just over 1 million people. I mean, probably the 1 million person was born a couple months ago, right? But for a state just getting over that edge of 1 million people, having a lack of around 18,000 affordable housing units is a big deal. And if, even if you put it in parameters of geographically, like what does that look like for our state? I mean, Bear, Delaware is probably around 20,000 people, right? 25,000 people, somewhere in that ballpark. And that's one of the top 5 local municipalities in our state. So this is certainly a big deal. And how do we get here? I think for years, and it's not just, when I say we, it's not just the state, but our nation has not invested enough in housing. It has not invested enough in particular in affordable housing. And what we're seeing today is the ramification of decades of lack of investment when it comes to affordable housing. Also, there's other areas that kind of like exacerbate this issue. We have, as a state, we are, in comparison to our neighbors, I like to think, as I said earlier, I'm a born and raised Delawarean. I'm 4th generation Delawarean. My great grandparents moved here and got here in like 1919, came to Wilmington. So my Delaware roots run deep. I know the next question was someone asked is, where'd you go to high school? Typical Delaware stuff, right? Being from here and being raised here, you automatically think like, no one really wants to come to Delaware, right? I grew up thinking no one really wants to come to Delaware, but that is the greatest lie around. Don't believe it. Do not believe it. If you compare us to our local neighboring states, we are the greatest per capita importer of people into our state. That is Pennsylvania, above New Jersey, New York, all these other spaces. Everyone may talk about how nice it is to be there, but yet for some reason, everyone is coming here, right? Quality of life, affordability. Affordability is a relative word in this conversation that we're having today. But the percentages show, whether it's the high level of development in Sussex County or the just boom right now in areas of Middletown, where you have like a 42% increase in growth. So we're having so many people, and we're already having, let me even clarify, we have so many people moving to our state because we're amazing, It's cool being amazing, having everyone want to be here, but it also highlights some of the greater issues that we have in our state, right? The fact that we only, as a state, have produced two types of housing. One is single family detached homes. And the other one are your mid kind of like apartment, luxury style apartment kind of complex. So about 60% of all the homes in Delaware, about 10 years ago, it was around 58%. Today, it may even be around 61%, but around 60% of all housing in Delaware is single family detached. Let me say it again, 60% of all the homes in Delaware are single family detached. The other homes, those kind of like apartment style luxury apartments, that's around, I think it's around somewhere around like 14%. And those are the two kind of bookends of the types of homes we have in Delaware. So what does that mean, right? So that means for many people, for those who are trying to come back and for a lot of the parents whose children just graduate from college at random school and try to come back and try to get that apartment, there's not as many opportunities for them to find it. So what do? They stay on their parents' couch, right? For many of the people who are already at the margins here in Delaware and finding a new place, because we're not creating those said units, it becomes even that much harder to find those units, right? So it's with so many people coming in, it's like these layers and these layers and layers and layers. And so it is a tighter market. In particular, I would even say that this can be seen and felt the most, in my opinion, Sussex County. What is going on in Sussex County right now with the heightened level of people moving in and lack of affordable housing? It is horrific in many cases to see the way some of our I think of as family, our fellow brothers and sisters of this state live, right? And so we are at the Housing Authority, we're doing all that we can. And we'll go through some of those solutions that we have and a lot of things that we are working on around these issues. But also, and I'm going to shut up after this, also in regards to housing, I think we also have to think about it's not just, it's housing is an issue, but also it's the lack of income is a major issue as well, and how that compounds. Stats that we've been able to pull from the Department of Labor show that we have around 400, the most recent data that's been able to be pulled is from 2021, and it shows around 400 out of the million some odd people living in our state are those working that make up our state's workforce is around 450,000. Out of that 450,000, 26.4% of those individuals, 26.4% make $15 or less per hour. And which shines a major light on some of these great issues, right? And then when we take it up a little bit further, you're looking at around 42% of all working Delawareans. 42% of all working Delawareans make $20 or less per hour. So what does that mean? That means if I am in Dover, and I'm looking at my fair market rent sheet, but if I'm in Dover and I am making that, let's even say I'm at that $15 per hour, that it roughly equates to around $30,000 a year. That $30,000 a year, if you're in Dover, you're looking at a one bedroom for around $984 a month for fair market rent. That is, I mean, I'm not the greatest at math, but that's over $10,000, $11,000 before we even take out taxes from the $30,000, right? That one is made. And this is just if you're looking for a one bedroom, if you don't have additional children, whatever the case may be. So these are some of the issues that we're dealing with. So this is also, it becomes a housing issue. It becomes issues with wage and being able to access and be able to provide opportunities to move in said housing. So we're working with Department of Labor, we're working with Workforce Development Board and others, because this is a comprehensive issue when we talk about housing and being able to house those most in need within our community. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to talking about some of the solutions later. Thank you.
That'd be great. And before you leave, there is one question that I think would be helpful before we continue is, can you define what actually is affordable housing in Delaware?
So everyone has different, that's a great question. So everyone has different answers when it comes to definitions may vary depending on agency, organization, so on and so forth. We look at it from a certain amount of your AMI, the area median income. And so based upon said area median income, making sure that you're not spending more than 30%, 25% on for housing is a major part of that because it prohibits also you from being able to save, to navigate any issues that may come up just in general. But other agencies, organizations may have, kind of a different mark, but it's not even just the affordability, but it's also like quality housing as well. Those two pieces kind of coming together because just because one is affordable does not make it quality housing for someone. So.
Thank you very much, Director Young, and we will bring you back after everybody else has a chance to speak. Thanks.
Thank you.
I want to now turn to Rachel Stucker, whose box I cannot find. Will the real Rachel Stucker stand up? Where is your box? There you are.
I just pinned myself, so hopefully that helps.
I see you, but you're not as big. There you are. Now you're really big. Rachel Stucker is the Executive Director of Housing Alliance Delaware, a statewide nonprofit organization that works to advance housing opportunities and end homelessness. She is a returned Peace Corps volunteer and has worked in youth services, community development, and direct crisis services with the homeless. Rachel grew up in Delaware, earned her graduate degree in urban affairs and public policy from the University of Delaware's Biden School of Public Policy. She lives in Newcastle County with her partner and their preschooler. And we really appreciate you coming to share your wisdom with us tonight, Rachel. Thank you.
Happy and very honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I am gonna also do my best to stay under 10 minutes. I think what happens when some of us get talking who really care about this issue is it's hard to stop, but I'm gonna force myself to stop. I'm also gonna share my screen and I hope that you all can see it. Sonia, can you nod if you can see it? Okay, I can actually see your face, so that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Hold on, sorry. Okay. All right, so I was asked to speak today about kind of how we see the housing crisis and the housing problem from the Housing Alliance Delaware, where we sit. And I'm gonna share some information about, from the perspective of our organization, half of our staff we do a lot of different work at our organization, but half of our staff work in the centralized intake program. Some of you may know this as 1833 Find Bed. And some of you may or may not know this as the phone call that rarely gets you what you were hoping you'd get when you called it. Which is a fair assessment of the challenge of trying to find people who are in a housing crisis access to resources and help. So I wanted to share with you some information about who called us and where they were calling us from in 2022. So for the year of 2022, and a couple of descriptors here. So obviously someone has to think to call us, know to call us, hear to call us, right to call us. So this isn't an exhaustive description of the need. And the folks that call us are really people who perceive, 99.9% of the people who call us are people who perceive that they are going to be homeless or already are homeless, that they're in a crisis. They're calling because they have nowhere else to go and they were told maybe someone at this number can help you. So the largest number of folks that called us in 2022 were folks who were staying temporarily with family and friends in a doubled up living situation, maybe for a week or two, maybe for 3 months, right? It depends on the caller. But someone who's, you would think of as couch surfing. Those aren't folks who are saying, I can stay here for another 6 months. Those are folks who are saying, I can't be here anymore. I need to go somewhere else. Where can I go? And then the next largest group are folks who reported when they called that they were unsheltered. So that's 2,700 folks. It doesn't mean they were unsheltered for an extent. Some folks may have been unsheltered all year, some for one night. But when they called us, they were unsheltered, meaning they were sleeping in a car, an encampment, a tent, a park, on a bench, in an abandoned building, a place that's not meant for human habitation. The next largest group are folks who are already in some type of homeless shelter. And then I just want to highlight folks, over 1,200 folks, households. So it could be individuals or families with children, households, called who were staying in a hotel or motel that they themselves were paying for, and didn't have the funds to continue doing that and had nowhere else to go. So in total, more than 11,000 households called us in 2022. Now, this is a really rough, we could do a seminar on how I've organized this data here. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly and try to use really broad definitions. So a lot of homeless assistance, not all by any means, but a lot of homeless assistance resources, the ones that our organization refers people to, that we're familiar with, that we have a direct connection to, have some HUD funding in them. So funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level. There are lots of other resources out there. So the one on the left, almost 5,000 of the households who called us were eligible for some type of homeless help in that HUD funded system, because of their living situation, because they were either unsheltered or didn't have anywhere to go in the next day or two, right? And only about 1,500 were able to be households were able to be referred throughout the year to at some type of homeless resource. I can define that in much more detail if folks are interested. But this is really just a rough sketch to show you the demand for those resources versus the our ability to refer and connect people to available resources. We only refer folks who contact us to resources when they are available. And then the chart on the right, the demand for housing help. These are folks who I would describe as being imminently homeless. They may be in their own rental, but they're told they have to leave by next week, or they're being evicted, or they're staying with family and friends, but they can only stay for another few nights or another week, or they're self-paying at a motel. So that's that group on the right. And for that, more than 5,000 folks, there's usually very little, if any, help to be offered. Some of the biggest contributors that we see from the people who contact us for help is rental costs versus incomes. A lot of people who call us are working, were recently working, can no longer work because they can no longer get to work. But rental costs versus income and the lack of tenant protections in our state. And so I'll talk a little bit briefly about both of those things. And so you heard Director Young speak about this briefly as well, but the disparity between what people earn when they work and the amount it costs to pay rent the last couple of years. And again, we're not unique in this, but we are pretty high up there. And at the national level, rents have really skyrocketed the last couple of years. Nationally, they're starting to stabilize a bit, but for folks who signed a lease for a $1,200 a month one bedroom that used to be an $800 a month one bedroom, they're still in that $1,200 for a one bedroom lease. So in Delaware, the Department of Labor estimates a little over 50,000 workers earn minimum wage. In order to afford at that 30% of your income level that Director Young was describing, a modest one bedroom apartment, not a luxury, a minimum wage worker in Delaware would need to work 71 hours a week. You can see the annual income needed to afford the different, sizes, different units, rental units and types. And just some examples of workers who earn less than the one bedroom housing wage, meaning when we say housing wage, we mean the amount of money you have to earn to be able to afford at that 30% level a one bedroom. So retail, sales, cashiers, teaching assistants, home health and personal care aides. And most of what I just talked about is assuming that a person is able to work. For folks who are reliant on disability income, at $841 a month, although it's much higher than it was 2 years ago, is nowhere near enough to be able to afford to pay rent without assistance. So we get these calls all of the time. Top tenant issues that we get. Illegal evictions. So when I say illegal evictions, what I mean is people who have been told by their landlord either, you know, you've been locked out, you can't get back in, or I'm gonna lock you out and you're not gonna be able to get back in. More commonly, folks are told by the landlord, I'm gonna file an eviction against you. If you leave in the next 48 hours, or if you leave in the next 72 hours, I won't. And oftentimes people will choose to leave. They choose to leave because in Delaware, if an eviction is filed against you, it stays on your record in perpetuity. So people have to make the choice between, do I go sleep in my car because I'll have a better chance at getting another unit next time, because I'm $500 late on rent, I don't know where I'm going to get that $500, or I might be able to get it, but it might not be in time. So let me go sleep in my car until I figure out a next place to go, or let me go stay at my friend's house, even though her, you know, brother lives there and uses, whatever the situation is, right? We hear a lot of really, really nasty situations, people calling are in crisis. And it is far more common than I think people want to believe, that people are illegally evicted, whether because they're pressured to leave or told they have to leave, or because unfortunately we have a system that makes it that it may actually be in their best interest to leave, because there is no way to get the help they would need to be able to fight that eviction or stay in their home. That's very common. And the other, we get a lot of calls from folks who are in substandard or dangerous housing situations, whether it's they don't have heat, they don't have, the water stopped working, right? So some of those really basic things, or there's mold and it's making the kids' asthma worse. All kinds of dangerous housing quality issues come up, and folks are looking for other places to go. And unfortunately, a lot of times the answer to that is, we don't have other places to go. There are ways that you can search for rental units on the market, but there's nothing special or additional for folks, unfortunately, that are in that situation. And so these are the types of folks that we hear from all of the time. And that's it from my perspective. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a good way to orient us, and I appreciate it. So then what you're about to learn about me is that French is one of those languages I never took. And so I've been practicing, but I know it's not going to sound quite right. So Dr. Stephen Mitchell is director of the Center for Community Research and Service and associate professor of public policy at the University of Delaware. He's a recognized expert on housing and homelessness. He has done pioneering work with using administrative and survey data to assess housing outcomes on how people experience homelessness, use services in the mental health, criminal justice, child welfare, healthcare, and veteran systems, and how receiving housing and related service interventions impacts homeless and formerly homeless households. He also works extensively with various homeless services providers, organizations in Delaware and Philadelphia, and sits on the board of Delaware's statewide homeless continuum of care. It's a privilege to have you with us, and we're looking forward to learning from you as well.
All right, thank you, Sonia, and thank you for taking the time to get my name in the French pronunciation, which I don't hear very often. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, especially the League of Women Voters and the Housing Alliance, and good to see everybody. And as an academic, it's hard for me to talk about any topic for 10 minutes, especially about homelessness. I mean, I've taught whole courses about homelessness, but I will keep it to that. And I will do so by presenting an anecdote, a metaphor, and a figure with some numbers on it. Can't help myself, got to get some numbers in there somehow. So I've got a brief PowerPoint, if I can get the screen share down right. And there, and I'm assuming somebody will tell me if they can't see it. But anyway, I've been, involved with either providing services or researching homelessness for since the 1980s. I'll date myself. Back then it was kind of a relatively new program. Relatively new problem. Something kind of drew me in, really interested me in it. And there was always that assumption that this was kind of a a fleeting problem, that it would pass. And here we are, what, about 40 years later, and it's still with us. If anything, it seems to be getting worse at this point. And my point here is to tie this to affordable housing. And I think homelessness in a lot of ways is the extreme manifestation of affordable housing. I mean, there is only so much affordable housing, meaning there are people who will go without, and by definition, those people who go without are homeless. And I'll kind of to kind of elaborate a little bit on that, I'll start with the anecdote. About a year or two ago, I was asked to speak to the Delaware Association of Realtors, and they had this was back in COVID, and it's a virtual conference, and they asked me to talk about affordable housing. And I said, are you sure you want me to talk about affordable housing? Because I may have a perspective that is not shared by many of your constituents. They said, by all means, tell it like you see it. I said, great. And so I prepared to do that, was prepared for it to get, shall we say, a bit testy. And before I went, there was a panel of, I guess each county has an association of realtors, and there was a panel, all 3 counties. The head of that association basically said, what the state of real estate was in their counties. And to my shock and amazement, all 3 of them mentioned how we need more affordable housing. And they had a different perspective of it. But the one I remember the most was the one in Sussex County, who basically was saying, yeah, it's true. There's more housing, you get more retirees from other states, a little bit like Eugene was mentioning earlier, coming down. But their bread and butter as realtors were still kind of, young, up and coming families looking for starter homes, looking for something 3 bedrooms, maybe 4 bedrooms, something very modest. And that housing just wasn't there. And they needed more of it, and it wasn't coming. And really, that's kind of where, from a homelessness perspective, that's where it starts. Because those families then who have the means, who are looking to get into their own housing, they're stuck in rentals, and upper end rentals, but rentals nonetheless, which crowd kind of another strata of people who would be in those rentals but are getting more modest ones, and they crowd a population, and so on till you get to homelessness, and there is literally nothing left. So when we talk about, and so that's kind of one way to see how homelessness happens, and also to say that any kind of housing, even if it doesn't directly affect the homeless population, is going to ease the pressure on affordable housing, on the kind of the lowest strata of housing that would be affordable to the folks who are, who basically can't pay the rents that are available. And so that kind of puts things in perspective, and that's why I've kind of got this little this slide here, where an impact on building housing on any kind of housing, increasing the availability is going to have an impact going down into the lower strata, and is going to open more housing for people. The second, again, is kind of for a metaphor, where kind of ask you to look for a minute on housing as on homelessness like musical chairs. And I think, and I saw the flyer for this webinar, where they had the kind of this balance, where you had a house on one side and you had all these people on the other side of the scale, and people climbing up and trying to get to the other side to the house. I think that illustrates what I'm trying to say even better than this kind of metaphor of musical chairs, where the chairs represent the housing, the people walking around the chairs represent the people in need of housing, and when the music stops, there's only so much housing available, and somebody's going to get left without housing. And I think so. 2 points I want to make with that. First of all is just basic math or whatever. When you have less housing than you have people, you're going to have a shortage of housing. You are going to get homelessness, and again, homelessness is what happens all the way at the extreme. The thing I want to say here is kind of, what with the musical chairs, where this metaphor then also strikes is it kind of has some indication about who becomes homeless, because everybody is not, is not equally poised to become homeless, and it's those folks who are most vulnerable who are least likely to, to just run towards a chair when the music stops, are going to be those people who are going to be more likely to be homeless, are going to be those who are overrepresented in the homeless population. And so, and that represents a wide range of populations that represent, I think the first kind of most common general denominator is going to be poverty. Those folks who are poor, those folks who have low incomes, those folks who are least able to pay rent are going to be the ones who are going to be left standing when the music stops, no matter what their other situations are. But you're also going to get, you get people, there's racial disparities. African Americans who have long borne the brunt of housing discrimination. Also, the Housing Alliance has put out several studies looking at racial inequities among the homeless population, and African Americans and other racial and ethnic minorities are overrepresented among those who are left standing when the music stops. That's something that's not unique to Delaware. That's something that that's something that's not unique to homelessness. When you're looking at housing, I mean, there's discrimination and segregation and a long history of that all through our history, and that continues here with homelessness. That also extends to some more stigmatized populations, people with mental illness, people with substance abuse, who basically have not only in poverty, but who don't have access to family support, and also who don't have access to services where they can get assistance for the behavioral health and other services that they need. They are going to be disproportionately among those left standing. Other populations, pregnant women are another. Pregnant women again who are poor, who don't have the family support, and who basically are either have small kids or are getting or have a child on the way who doesn't have a partner with them. They are going to be at higher risk. And again, so you have a broad range. You have people judging people in different ways, but that presents the constituency. And what I want to emphasize there is the common denominator there is housing. Again, that they need housing, they don't have housing, and that that there are not enough chairs. And a lot of times people will say, no, it's some kind of other situation, and people may need other services, but again, the common denominator is housing. And if we found an answer for housing for people, say, with mental illness or for substance abuse, and without getting additional housing, that would just mean that some other group would be at higher risk for housing. You need to broaden the pool. And so the last slide that I have, and like I said, I promised a number slide, is this is the last 5 years of what is known as the point in time count, held here in Delaware, which basically enumerates, counts the homeless population in Delaware. Each night in January, people go out and they go to shelters, they go to transitional housing facilities.
If
they
you
go
just
out
got
and they-
quiet, it's hard to hear you. I'm
I'm
sure
sorry.
what happened. Go
Is
ahead.
this
Can you
better?
start again with this slide? That's better. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Okay. Apologize. I often get accused of being too loud, seldom too quiet. So this is a slide basically that shows the homeless counts for the last 5 years from what is called the point in time count. One night in January, Housing Alliance here in Delaware coordinates this. They send out volunteers to homeless shelters, to transitional housing facilities, to go out to, beat the bushes, look for camps and other people sleeping outside, and literally count the number of homeless in the population. It is far from a perfect count, but it is kind of an indicator of what the population is doing. And so this count has been going on for at least a decade, at least 15 years now. And generally somewhere between 900 and 1100 people is the count that we've gotten. And in the last 2 years, this has increased substantially from 2020, where they had about 1100. It went to in 2021, it went up to almost 1600. And in 2022, it went up to over 2300. And so basically in 2 years, the homeless population that's been counted has in effect doubled. And so the thing I want to just kind of finish my comments on is what that means. And I would say, I mean, homelessness here, this is a function not only of the homeless population growing, but it's also a function of more facilities being ironically, more assistance being available for the homeless population. One of the things, this happened during the pandemic, and as best we can tell, the homelessness may have gotten worse for some folks. Some folks actually did, who would have been homeless because of the eviction moratorium and the rental assistance that the State Housing Authority provided. Basically, who would have been homeless pre-pandemic probably managed to avoid homelessness here with the assistance that's available. So it's kind of hard to tell what's actually driving this doubling of numbers, other than what we do know is that the state of Delaware provided a large number of hotel and motel vouchers. In addition to the shelter supply that was out there, people who were facing homelessness also had the option to get housed temporarily through hotel and motel vouchers. And largely it was people staying in hotels and motels that drove these increases in homelessness. And what I want to say that's going on here is likely that these are people, people who entered the hotels and motels were people who were very precariously housed to start with. These are the people who were calling the centralized intake, who were living in somebody else's living room, or who were living in a car, or who were living in a situation where they were basically homeless, but they were not counted as homeless in these numbers. They were kind of more the hidden homeless people that we just aren't aware of until they get the assistance and go into a shelter, or in this case, go into hotels and motels. And so these numbers kept climbing. And I don't know if it was so much an increase in the homeless population as much as it was in a greater visibility of the homeless population, and also a testament of how the homeless population is kind of the tip of an iceberg, and where it also shows that just the extent of the housing need that's just below that we don't see, that we don't become aware of. And the last message I want to say is, ironically, now the hotel and the motel voucher program has ended. And so we just had the 2023 version of the PIT count, of the point in time count. And ironically, because the federal money ran out, so the hotel and motel voucher program stopped, and so there's less shelter and temporary housing that is available in the state. And it would not be surprising if the homeless numbers actually went down again this year, and closer to the levels that they've been. And just like the rapid increase didn't necessarily mean a doubling of the population, when the numbers go down, it's in danger of providing the illusion that the problem is getting better, when in effect it's the same affordable housing problems and the shortages that are largely driving this program. There's not been a whole lot of changes in that. And so the numbers in all likelihood mean that while we perceive there's less of an urgency, all that's going to mean is that there is as many people who are homeless, they're just not as visible as they've been over the last 2 years. And with that, I thank you.
Before you take the slide down and disappear, there are two questions in the chat specifically about, one specifically about the slide, which is, what is the dotted yellow line? And then the second one about what you were saying about motel hotel vouchers. does that include the Hope Center in, well, the question says in Wilmington?
That does include the Hope Center in Wilmington, and that shelter is going, and the people who are there are getting, they are continuing to shelter as many people, and they are finding funding from other sources. So that's one bright spot in there. The yellow line is kind of what we call a regression line or a trend line, and what that does is you see kind of a little bit of fluctuation year per year, and this kind of shows the steady increase that has happened over the last, the last 5 years, and so kind of smooths out what the increase looks like.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You could stop sharing.
Okay.
Your screen. Thank you. And I am going to ask, let's see if I can see everybody. I want to bring the other panelists up with you to be pinned. There we go. And there was another question in the chat that I wanted to share, and you all can decide which one of you would like to answer it. It was, how many different agencies in Delaware work on housing, and do they coordinate with each other? You're muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. So when you say, so I'm assuming is it housing? So when we talk about housing agencies, so there's 5 housing authorities in the state of Delaware. There's the Delaware State Housing Authority. There's the Wilmington Housing Authority, the Newark Housing Authority, and Dover Housing Authority. Did I give all 5? That just Delaware State, Wilmington, Newcastle, Newark, Dover. Those are the 5. And we work extremely close with one another. We just had a meeting, all of us sitting down last week to talk about ways that we can connect. I think you may have even seen recently, Newcastle County is working with the city of Wilmington to make it vouchers easily able to port, meaning go from Wilmington to Newcastle and vice versa. Our housing authorities, just to provide some context, housing authorities for the most part, bless you, Rachel. Housing authorities for the most part we have brick and mortar space. So like the Delaware State Housing Authority, we have 600 units ranging from Middletown all the way down to Selbyville. But you have, for years, the Wilmington Housing Authority was kind of the largest one of them all, they have around 2,000 brick and mortar units. Newcastle does not have any brick and mortar units. They only have housing choice vouchers, which many people call like Section 8. Newark has maybe 60 brick and mortar units, and they have housing choice vouchers as well. Dover may have, I think they're around 268 brick and mortar units, along with vouchers. Most of us, when we, and I'll shut up after this, most of us, in working together, we recognize the fact that we want to make it easier for people to go from, if you're living in Dover to Wilmington and vice versa. But the biggest issue that most people come across with many of our housing authorities is the fact that we have such long lists as housing authorities. When I walked into this job, we had over 11,000, close to 12,000 people on our waiting list. When you have, I think the city of Wilmington, their waiting list has been closed for almost 4 years now, 4 or 5 years. And what is a brick and mortar situation? When we say brick and mortar, great question. I apologize for the vernacular. So brick and mortar just means public housing units. And so these are just actual public housing units that you'll see driving by. There's 2 different ways. Physical apartments, correct. Physical apartments. So there's 2 ways people are able to be benefited from some of the work at our housing authorities. One is through the actual public housing units or physical apartments, or the housing choice voucher, which many people commonly refer to as Section 8. And so this gives people the ability to live in a physical apartment, physical home, or be able to take their voucher to a said landlord and be able to use that. So we work together constantly. We all feel connected. We're in a small state, so we have no choice but to work together in meeting some of the challenges that we have.
Thank you. Rachel, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, obviously from the public sector side, that's what there is. I think on the there are a lot of organizations, nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations working on housing from a lot of different angles. And to the extent that they are able to, they coordinate. But I think there's a lot more coordinating that can be done, especially as Eugene said, in a small state. And it depends on how you define working on housing. So now I'm trying not to get too into that definition. But anywhere from, we have 30 plus homeless shelters in Delaware. Many get some public dollars to operate, but many are also operated purely through volunteers and donations, and many have a faith tradition associated with them. So if you're working from homeless service providers and up, hundreds and hundreds of people are working on housing, and lots of organizations are working on housing. The extent to which we're all working towards the same thing, and the extent to which we're all the resources are very federal resources, state resources, local resources, philanthropic resources. So just like any sector, there are lots of resources going a lot of different places. It's not all organized. It's not always aligned. And there's a lot of ways that better coordination can happen.
Okay. So I wanted to, go ahead, sorry.
So, okay, I'll just throw in my 2 cents real quick.
Please.
And say, and basically challenge folks to broaden their view of what constitutes affordable housing. I mean, there's a lot of very dedicated people in nonprofits and specifically doing affordable housing. But I think if we're going to get to where there is affordable housing there's affordable housing on a scale that we need, we're also going to need to make it more, just kind of more attractive for a lot of other folks to join as well. Private sector developers, Capano developers who I generally don't sympathize with or am particularly on their side, but they've got a multifamily development down in Middletown where they've gotten an incredible amount of pushback from, and are taking the city to court, and have had some setbacks, and again they're just zoning, basically what's called NIMBY, not in my backyard kind of things that they've encountered are the exact same things that a lot of other folks are encountering. That makes it a lot less financially incentivizing for private developers to go in, and which also leaves a lot of housing undeveloped. So I kind of see a vision when there's a much broader constituency, not just the nonprofits and the government agencies that we traditionally think of go into affordable housing.
Thank you. I wanted to build on something that, Steve, you started talking about, in which you started talking about the intersectionality between being homeless and systematic racism. And I wanted to give Rachel and Eugene a chance to also address the intersectionality between your particular topics of expertise and systematic racism.
Yeah, so Steve already talked a little bit about how that shows up in the homeless population, that groups that are more at risk, poverty, lack of economic opportunity. 60% of people who are experiencing homelessness in Delaware on any given night are Black or African American, whereas 22% of Delaware's population is Black or African American. So you can see that is not the overrepresentation there is pretty significant. And I mean, it's historical. It goes back to redlining, and the prohibition for African American families and Black families to move into the suburbs, to purchase homes, not getting the same benefits from the federal government through the GI Bill in the 40s and 50s. I mean, you can trace it back to the founding of America to be, and I don't mean that to be, that sounds dismissive. You can trace it back to the founding of America. I mean, and it contributes significantly to the cyclical nature of the problem. Homelessness in particular is a very traumatic experience, especially for young children, to not have a basic sense of safety, to not know where you're going to sleep, to not know where you're going to eat, to oftentimes children and parents are separated when they have housing instability and homeless issues. The children have to stay here with this sibling has to stay here with this friend, and this sibling has to stay here with this friend while mom goes and sleeps in the shelter. These are all things that happen to unfortunately at a disproportionate rate to Black and African American households that then continue to harm those communities and harm people of color in our communities.
There we go. There I go talking while I'm muted again. So I'm certainly in agreement. I think I'm going to add just hope everyone can see this as something to the chat. There's this there's an article from Forbes magazine. You can Google it if you want. It came out September 2017. Black and Latino wealth to hit zero by 2053. Let me see if I can throw it in the chat for you all, just so you can have. Hopefully, can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So you'd be astonished how computer illiterate I am. But the reason why I say that, and the reason why I'm putting this in the chat is, you know, when we're looking at the median wealth of Black and Latino families hitting zero by 2053. Then it paints a picture as to why we're in part of this situation, right? It paints a picture as to why you have the highest number of cases of those who are homeless are Black men. This is something, it is like it becomes like an ongoing issue. Many stratification economists like Derek Hamilton out of New School and like Sandy Darity from Duke will tell you that it normally takes someone like 20 years to come out of poverty if they're able to like fully get themselves out of poverty, right? And it doesn't. And so when you think about that, the 20 years, but that means like there's not a major issue where you have to give money to your family member who's also struggling with financial issues. Like I know for myself, like, you know, I'm the first generation of my family that was actually born out of not born in poverty. And so even with me, and I have lots of cousins, and I've been able to thankfully be able to help with my wife, provide a great family for ourselves, but I still have family members that need financial support from me for a variety of reasons, from bills to bailed out. You know, these are some of the issues that, you know, the collateral consequences of being poor and not having funds. And so as we talk about this issue of housing, and I'm glad Rabbi Sonia Starr brings this up, because it's all on like this pendulum, right? And it's all about like financial, like the financial aspect of it all, kind of like it touches your housing, it touches your ability to and I'm bringing this up because I know we've worked on this with Legal Women Voters, but to bail oneself out if you get accused of a crime. It touches on the type of schooling you get, because that impacts where you move, impacts the type of schooling you predominantly are able to receive, the type of healthcare you receive. So all these different things are tied together. And as you read reports like this and different articles and journals from Dr. Derek Hamilton and others, it kind of touches on that aspect of how, and within many Black families, it's that aspect of, they call it the in vivo transfers from parent to child. Like I have X amount of, I'm able to pass this on upon me, my death, or I'm able to pass on to my child, money I'm able to get them, and how that helps that wealth to grow within a family. If you don't have that, it's hard to purchase that home in Lewis, that, you know, while the parent was there, prices were one thing 30 years ago, but now you can't even afford, the parent can barely afford to live there, let alone the child, right? And so these are some of the issues that we're dealing with when it comes to the intersectionality of race, housing, lack of financial security.
Thank you. I was wondering, there's a question in the chat that's asking how, if any of you could address the housing discrimination against individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
I
So,
could, oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Steve.
I'm not gonna have much to say about it, other than it's there, other than I've been having conversations with the interim director over at the State Division of Developmental Disability Services, DDDS, who recognizes that and who wants to kind of document, first step is always to like document the problem better and then to look at it and then to address it. So I'm glad that that got brought up. Rachel?
Agreed.
I wasn't gonna have a lot to say on that specific issue, other than to say, I was gonna kind of tie it back to just people with disabilities in general, which was not the question. But to the musical chairs, Steve, that you talked about, having a disabling condition makes you more at risk for being someone who's still standing when the music stops. And so when you look at people who are unhoused or experiencing housing instability, people with disabilities are far overrepresented in that population as well.
And I was just going to add that it's even less chairs. Trying to kind of go on with that, it's less chairs available for our brothers and sisters of the state when it comes to this, for those who are disabled. And so it makes it even harder to find said units, even, once the music stops. And on, we're working on, there's a project going on in Wilmington that is, I think it's one of the most, it is probably, I can't think of a recent development of like a fully accessible complex available for those who may have disabilities. But this is going on at Reverend Lottie's former church, where they're doing great work there, Pastor Margaret Moon. But it's something that's so very much needed, and it's also on the developer side. We have to help in providing. We're trying to work to make sure they have the funds, because it also costs more. The average unit may cost around $270,000 per unit, $260,000 per unit in our state. For some of these units, it jumps to a range around 300 and some odd dollars. So it's significantly more. So we're doing everything we can to even ensure we're providing those additional funds, because there's not enough units for those who are disabled.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat asking, while we continue this conversation, any plans to increase the 811 vouchers? But before you answer that question, you have to explain what 811 vouchers are. Whoever would like to touch that.
So you went off, Doc, did you want to go, or I saw you, did you go off mute to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. So this is 811 vouchers, and these all go to like housing choice vouchers. There's a variety of vouchers. Let me even just kind of like backtrack a little. There's a variety of vouchers that are given for a variety of different aspects, right? So it could be for family reunification in regards to child leaving foster care, or being or child in DSCYF, Division of Youth Children and their families. They leave DSCYF and they're being reunited back with their family. There's a voucher for that. There's vouchers for families who may have, or individuals who may have certain mental disabilities, where there's additional case management wrapped around. There's vouchers for men and women that have been impacted by gun violence. If a family is living, I'm just making this up, on the east side of Wilmington, and their child is shot in front of their house or in their neighborhood, the last place that child should be going back to is that same house on the east side of Wilmington. And so being able to provide vouchers through the Gun Violence Intervention System, GVI, And so they help provide vouchers in other areas of our state, maybe Dover, other areas of Sussex County. So overall, there needs to be more vouchers. I think that is one of the biggest things that we are trying to focus on as well. There just needs to be more vouchers. Also, vouchers helps a lot because for the most part, vouchers are used by kind of like your mom and pop landlords. And these are essentially the meat and potatoes of bringing in a lot of justice involved men and women who may be coming home from Baylor or Gander Hill or Smyrna. It is many of these mom and pop places that allow may allow many of these men and women to move into their home. They do allow them. So this is a huge, vouchers are very important. We've been having conversations with the governor. We just think there needs to be more vouchers involved. And I think that may be something I cannot say for this legislative session. I'm not sure when, but it is something that's involved in like the long-term conversation of being able to house people.
Thank you. When people talk about homelessness or affordable housing, it is common for them to assign personal responsibility to the people who are impacted by the problem. I often hear it, well, you know, they just need to get back to work. They just need to do something differently, right, to get their problem solved. Can you talk about how you see individual responsibility versus communal responsibility for this problem, for this affordable housing crisis? Any one of you who would like to address that?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry. Could you?
Sure. I often hear people talk about homelessness or affordable housing. They assign personal responsibility to the people who are homeless or can't find housing or being evicted. It's their fault. They did something wrong. So my question is, could you talk about how you see individual responsibility versus communal responsibility for this affordable housing crisis we have?
I'm happy to start. So so all people have choices, and some people sometimes make good choices, sometimes some people make bad choices, but it's definitely true that not all people have the same choices. And I have a lot of choices available to me that maybe someone else does or does not have on this call, and vice versa. So definitely individual choices can make a difference in a person's life for sure. But having worked directly with the homeless population, I think and if there may be folks here who have done the same, I every day was pretty much like really impressed that people were still alive. I know that sounds kind of dramatic, but it's true. It is really, really, really hard work to stay alive on the streets, or when you're housing unstable. To keep showing up and going to work when you're sleeping in your car, to figure out where you're going to eat and get up to see another day and do what you need to do to get the food and the clothes that you need to stay warm that night, is really hard work. And oftentimes, a lot of things, when you talk to people about their story, everyone comes to a crisis situation, and in this case, a homeless or unstably housed situation from a different place. But when you talk to folks, at least the folks that I work directly with, there was always something that happened to them that was not of their doing or choosing, that had a really significant impact on where they found themselves and the outcome. And it's people, so I'll tell a quick story and then I'll stop. I worked with one gentleman who's now deceased, and that happens a lot. Folks who are homeless tend to die much quicker than non-homeless folks. He was the self-appointed mayor of an encampment. He was very happy and proud of his setup. He had a heater, he had a generator, he had a VHS player and a TV, and he was set. He didn't, he would come in every once in a while to the center just to get a cup of coffee and chat. He didn't really need much help. And he didn't come into the winter shelter that we operated because he was an alcoholic and he needed to drink, and he was going to be fine. And then we didn't see him for a couple months, and people said he was fine. We're like, well, he's not coming in. That's weird. Like, we didn't see him for a while. One day he shows up looking all nice and fresh. turns out someone's letting him stay in an apartment while he does some some construction on it, because he was a construction worker. So he was helping to fix up and clean up this, fix up this apartment for a landlord, and the landlord was letting him stay there. And he looked all fresh and healthy, and he was like, I have my own shower and I have peace and quiet. And he could not stop talking about how amazing it was to have this like safe place to live with heat and water and cleanly, he couldn't stop talking about how happy he was. Of course, that only lasted for a couple of months. He had to leave after that, when the landlord decided to rent the place when it was done. But he's someone that people would look at and say he's choosing to be outside, right? He's choosing to be in an encampment. He's someone who's choosing to be homeless. I don't see it that way. People have to cope with trauma and disaster however they need to cope with it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would just quickly say that I think we, especially in a small state like ours, I think one of the biggest issues that we as Delawareans have to kind of recognize is that like we're all connected to each other. And whether we like it or not, what happens to that man that Rachel is just speaking about happens to us. It's like it's our family member. Like and I hate to sound like kind of like kind of weird I was saying, but like we literally rise together, we will fall together. And so I think one of the things that we have to think about is people want to work. People want to not be in these type of situations. If Deputy Secretary Daniel Walker was here right now, he would give a quick stat which I think is astounding. There were a lot of people that stayed in the hotels and motels, thousands that the state was able to keep state was able to keep from being on the streets. And out of those thousands of people that came through, over 62% of them had jobs, full-time jobs. They had full-time jobs. Over 60% of the people that were there had full-time jobs. And so it wasn't as if there were people there. I think there's this stigma of people don't want to work, people don't want to do, people are lazy. I mean, let's be very honest. And it's just, it's wrong and it's sad to say, but oftentimes many people don't recognize it until like them or their family member are in a said situation where then they say, man, this can happen to anyone. So I think we just really need to, like, when you talk about that, Dr. Rabbi Starr, I think for me, it's just about we are connected. We're too small in the state. We have more chickens in the state than people in the state. Like, we need to be better at like how we connect with one another, understand the fact that we're totally more tied to one another than we think we are.
I'll just basically Rachel and what Eugene are saying.
You need to lean forward, Steve, when you talk.
I'll echo what Rachel and Eugene are saying. Totally, totally agree with that. And it's a great sociologist, C. Wright Mills, who basically said the difference between a personal problem and a public problem is, and he said this in the context of unemployment, but it also fits with housing and homelessness, is that, when one person is unemployed, it's a personal problem. When thousands of people are unemployed, it becomes a public problem. And I think this problem is in the thousands and not in the individuals. And, there's only so much that you can write off to bad decisions and individual problems. And you need to start looking at the systematic issues of that first.
Somebody just wrote in the chat, I moved to Delaware January 2022 to work for the state and could not find a rental. I lived in a hotel for 6 weeks, could not afford a rental, but there was nothing available. So how much can you really do if something's not there, right? There's a question also in the chat, roughly how many total housing choice vouchers are available in Delaware? I don't know if that's a known number. More or less, kind of.
I could probably, it would take some time. I would have to get them because they're not issued, as I said before, there are 5 of us and we all have our own issuance of housing choice vouchers. So I don't know how many Carrie Casey has at Newcastle, or off the top of my head. I have an idea, but I have an idea of how many there may be, but I don't want to give a wrong number on the chat. I can get it back to you, Rabbi Star.
That'd be great. That'd be a wonderful thing. And it's also not just the housing authorities, if I understand, right? So the HIV Association,
Yes.
VOSH, there's all kinds of organizations that give out vouchers. It's rather complicated
Correct.
to figure out. So that would be helpful. So this is a question for each of you. In some ways, it's an unfair question, and I will cop to that at the beginning, because there's not one foundational problem that needs to be solved. But if you had to pick the one to start on, because most of us can only work on one issue, or if we're lucky, we have a couple other staff people, each of them can work on one issue, but at a time. So if you had to pick one foundational problem that needs to be solved to address the affordable housing crisis, what would it be? What would be that one issue that we all should be working on? And you all, I'm assuming, could have different answers or the same one, as you choose.
I'm willing to start.
Go ahead.
I think this speaks to Steve's point about the kind of different housing strata and how it all affects homelessness and everything. Is the public sector. So people tend to think of housing as a private market thing, and everyone's just kind of figures it out for themselves. That's our approach to housing generally as a society. What is there is there. There's no really way to control for it, and go forth and make it work for yourself and your family. So for me, the big thing is the public sector deciding that it really is it is part of their responsibility to really address and solve the problem. It's not that there's not a role for the private sector, but housing isn't a commodity. It's not something that only people should have if they have the money to be able to afford it. If people meet the eligibility criteria for, we recognize obviously food is a need. If people meet the eligibility criteria for SNAP benefits, for food stamps, they get them. We don't do that with housing. We do not recognize it as a need. We don't recognize it as a society as a right. And I think the closer we can get to that, where the public sector is saying we are going to invest in this, it is our responsibility to address this because it is a need of the people that live in our community and our state. So just, I guess, to say it another way is more money, but also more action, more money and more action from the public sector.
Thank you. Steve or Eugene?
I'll basically say, and I'll speak more for homelessness than for affordable housing. The two topics are closely related, but also somewhat different. But I think, again, I think the problem of homelessness and affordable housing is much bigger than we as a state, we in the state recognize. And I think, at least in terms of homeless services providers, that we basically go about too much as business as usual instead of just sounding the alarm more. And I say that to the state respectfully, and I also say that to us. And by us, I'm saying, I am on the board of the Continuum Care statewide. So that criticism applies to us as well. That we need to take more of a leadership role and basically sound the alarm a bit more. And that's not going to solve the problem, but it's a necessary start.
Thank you.
So I would say for my my colleagues, I'm looking. So it's kind of like two answers, Rabbi. You put me in a tough spot. So it's kind of like two answers. One is all we have to, and I do agree with some of what Rachel and Dr. Metro said. Like it is all about units. My job, all I care about, everything I care about is getting more units. We recently have had probably the largest investment in housing probably ever, in like one single within a 12-month period, over 120, looking at $122 million in housing, from around 32 million that went to direct allocations. Then the governor line item 60 million in ARPA funding, and then for programs that we're running to bolster more housing, and then another 30 million the governor just put in. This is the first time in decades funds were put from the general fund to ask specifically for housing. So this is, I mean, I can't stress, you know, when they say, it's often said that you're, don't tell me where your values, show me your balance sheet, or show me your budget. And I'm appreciative, you know, of the fact that over the last year, this has been the biggest thing, the greatest priority for us. And when I say us, it's all of state government. This is a major priority, which is the reason why we have $122 million, which is, I mean, it's this, I can't say for how little has been invested, how big $122 million is. So that's one. And it's kind of to keep on that going forward, right? It has to be a long-term investment, hopefully in housing and moving forward, and us working together with many of you on here and our affordable housing providers in order to get more affordable housing up, which is our goal. But the second thing I would say, for those on the outside, if you're saying like, what would I say is the thing that people should be focused on? I would say it's NIMBYism. I think.
Can you define NIMBYism?
Oh, I'm sorry, not in my backyard. Ism. So it is one of the biggest issues, I believe, when it comes to affordable housing. I give you know, two examples. I had a developer, market rate developer from Sussex County, tell me that his issue, and he does luxury market rate, and he said my biggest issue is market rate is NIMBYism, because I can build a housing development of 30 or 40 homes, and the moment I'm done with that 40th home and I get a permit to go on the other side of the road to build a new 30, 40 homes, the group from the previous group actually protest that I shouldn't move over there, and there should be no more additional homes in this neighborhood, right? And he's a market rate. This is not even, we're not even talking about affordable housing. We've had, I've had here, I've been here, I've had the pleasure of being Delaware State Housing Authority for about 18, 20 months now. One of the most astounding things to me ever was a town that would not provide water and sewer to a affordable housing developer that received tax credits to do affordable housing in a certain area, but the town, because they did not want any more affordable housing, would not provide them with access to water and sewer in order to do it. So these are the issues, the greater issues that we deal with. So we're I actually have a meeting with state planning tomorrow as we talk about how do we kind of bridge some of these different gaps. How do we make sure that affordable housing is in plans, in comprehensive plans? Every town, municipality has to have about a 5-year plan. How do we ensure that affordable housing is a part of that 5-year plan? We have towns in our state that have absolutely no affordable housing, right? And in many cases, they're feeling they're in some cases they're getting their butts kicked because of it, because they're now saying we're struggling because we can't have any workers that can work at the local restaurant or work at the coffee shop or be daycare providers. All these different areas where they're kind of excluding them out. So I'm totally in agreement with, yes, there's a link for YIMBY, Sussex DE, yes, in my backyard. These are some of the things that we have to work on if we're going to provide better quality housing throughout our state.
I'm going to thank the three of you more appropriately in a second, but I was told in my previous career that you always You always cause trouble when you give a clergy person a microphone. So I'm going to actually answer this one question myself. I actually think that if I had to pick one thing, it would be that every single person got involved in the cause. That until every single person who's part of our system cares about this problem and gets involved in whatever way you get involved, there will continue to be a problem. And so I have put my name, contact information in the chat, and I'm looking for housing advocates, looking to create a housing advocate movement. So please contact me. We're going to have more about what you can do in May when we have our final one, but I promise you the session is going to have lots of opportunities for you to testify between now and May. So please don't wait till then. It has been wonderful to learn from all three of you. I really appreciate the gift of your time and expertise. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. We just touched on this subject. We have a lot more to delve into. Today was all about the concepts, the numbers, the broad piece, but you started to hear hints of the people behind it. And that's really what Marches is going to be all about. March 20th at 7 p.m. is all about people with lived experience speaking from their own voice, how they got there, what their experience was, how it felt, how they got out of it or didn't get out of it, and why, and what we could do. April, we're going to learn from Melody, who's amazing, from HUD, all about the national perspective. And then in May, we are going to come back and talk about roll up your sleeves. It's time for us to get to work. So I want to thank you all again for coming. And I want to thank our panelists for making this a wonderful discussion. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and wait, one more question in the chat. I almost forgot, sorry. You will be able to find the video of this program on the YWCA's, not the YWCA, League of Women Voters, sorry, League of Women Voters website soon. Stay tuned.
And Rabbi Star, can I say real quick?
Please.
I just put my information in the chat. I just, if anyone has anyone wants to reach out to me, please let me know. Any way that we can be resourceful, we can connect you with certain people from our team. And thank you, HAD, League of Women Voters, everyone for having me such a great experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.